My friend Irma Jean was 90-some years old and struggling. Some bad falls had left her wobbly, even with the walker. And even with the hearing aid, she confessed she couldn't hear a thing in church, and still, she showed up Sunday after Sunday, and every single time she would tell me the same story after church. It was a story of heartbreak, of losing her husband at a tragically young age, becoming a widow responsible for the care of 4 small children. Can you imagine? It was totally devastating, and she found herself the subject of pity. People said behind her back, and even to her face, "Those poor kids don't stand a chance in the world without a father." She would pause her story just long enough for me to offer my own sympathy. But then her blue eyes would turn feisty as she told me the next part. But I showed them all, and she would proceed to list every advanced degree and every major accomplishment of her 4 incredible children who had grown to be truly admirable adults. And to think, she would conclude her story every time, people said they didn't have a chance in the world. In a life that spanned nearly a century, that was her greatest accomplishment, that she, with the help of her stalwart mother-in-law, had managed to raise those poor fatherless children to become capable, successful adults. Every time she told me this story, I would say, as a kind of benediction, your children weren't poor, they were blessed. Their blessing was not to have had lost a father, of course. That was and always will be a tragedy in their lives, but their blessing was to have had a mother and grandmother who refused to let them be defined by their loss. Others may have pitied their misfortune, but Irma Jean and her mother-in-law did something far more helpful. They focused on helping the children live into their potential. They refused to see them as simply the victims of terrible circumstances. It turns out there is a name for this way of thinking: asset framing. Social visionary Trebian Shorters uses this term to combat the negative effects of labeling people according to their deficits. In contrast, asset framing is about defining people by their aspirations and contributions before acknowledging their challenges and investing in them for their continued benefit to society. So, for example, instead of slapping the label "at risk" on kids who face obstacles that may prevent them from graduating, we might refer to them as students hoping to graduate, acknowledging that while their academic journey may not be easy, they do have something extremely valuable: hope and a dream. Hope and dreams are powerful things worth investing in, as my friend Irma Jean's 4 adult children can tell you. When I heard about this concept of asset framing, something clicked for me. I'd heard this before somewhere in a sermon, an old sermon, preached by a carpenter at the base of a hillside nearly 2,000 years ago. It's documented in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and we'll hear his account of it now. This is Jesus speaking to the disciples he's just called into his inner circle after a night spent on the mountaintop in prayer. Starting with verse 17, here is how Luke tells it. Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out of him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets." There's more, but let's pause right here and check in. Did you hear how Jesus used asset framing? Blessed are the poor. Why? Because this kingdom of God belongs to them. Jesus sees them first as holders of this aspiration, naming them first by their blessedness. Yes, he acknowledges their poverty, but this neither defines them nor prevents them from building the kingdom of God. In fact, their poverty may be a hidden asset because they are not tied to wealth. God's kingdom, as Jesus envisions it here on earth, is a realm in which all people are valued not for their wealth, but for their belovedness to God. This is Jesus assigning great value to the poorest of his disciples who will naturally accept his teachings about God's design for the world in which abundant living is not limited to the wealthy. Jesus' blessing extends to the hungry in the same way. He honors them by calling them blessed, not because of their hunger, but because of their hope of being well-fed, which Jesus assures them that they will be, because that is the goal of this kingdom of God they will build together here on earth. And those who weep, their blessing is the expectation of future joy, for the kingdom work to which they are called is the work of joy. Living to serve God by helping others will bring them the sense of purpose and the community they crave. Jesus sees them not as people of despair, but of potential for joy, and for this, they are blessed. Jesus is also aware that his new followers are probably going to stir up some dissent and gain enemies among those whose power and privilege will be challenged by his teachings. Those followers who will find themselves excluded from the in crowd and reviled by former friends, he also calls blessed, saying, "Great is their reward in heaven," which may be better translated, "Great is their reward in God's sight," for God does not see things the way people do. Their participation in the beautiful, difficult, often unpopular, liberating work of God's will be scorned by those who prefer the status quo, but in God's eyes, the disciples will be the ones getting it right. That is their blessing. Seeing life this way, seeing people this way, it's a dramatic departure from the usual way of viewing the poor and the persecuted as having somehow less value. In Jesus' view, which represents God's view, those minimalized and pitied by the world for their deficits are valued and celebrated for their assets. Their poverty, their hunger, their sorrows, their persecution is not overlooked. It just simply does not define them or limit them. They are beloved to God, and in the kingdom of God that Jesus is introducing, their belovedness is their most important asset. What more of a blessing could anyone need? Well, actually, they could use the blessing that comes from being valued and uplifted by those who have the means to do so. And in the kingdom of God, Jesus knows that there will be disciples who have material abundance and the social status that goes with that. So what about them? Are they blessed too? This is what Jesus says, as I pick up at verse 24. "But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets." Whoa, that sounds woefully depressing. What does Jesus mean, woe to you who are rich or well-fed or laughing or popular? Well, the word translated woe is ouai in Greek, and it is an interjection, an attention-grabbing word like whoa or heads up. Jesus is trying to get his rich, round-bellied, joyful, well-connected disciples to watch out for something. What is it? They need to watch out that they do not become too comfortable with their own comfort, because things could change. They also need to watch out because if the main consolation in their lives, their primary source of satisfaction, is their abundance, their material assets and social status, then God is in second place, and they are ill-suited to the work to which Jesus is calling them. That work is the leveling of the very world they live in, the world that allows for some to have much and others not enough. A world that's fallen out of balance with God's design, a world that Jesus came to even out. Which is why Jesus is preaching this sermon, not from a high mountaintop, but from a level place, a place where everyone is literally standing at the same elevation, none lifted any higher than the others. And from this vantage point, he asks the privileged to check their priorities and he declares the less privileged to be blessed, not because their lives will be without suffering, but because he recognizes in them the same spirit, the same inspiration, the same aspiration that is within him, to create a new way forward in which life can be better for all. Jesus, seeing that promise and potential in the poorest of his disciples, makes everyone else see it too. This is Jesus saying, do not undervalue the poor or define them solely by their poverty. It's a little bit radical and a great deal powerful, because when we honor the God-given blessedness of people who have been devalued by the world, little miracles start to happen. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu spoke candidly of life in South Africa under the dreadful system of apartheid. Every aspect of life was oppressive to the native population. Their white employers very often didn't even bother to learn their names. Men were addressed as boy, and women were often given the generic name Annie. Can you imagine going to work every single day and not being called by your name? Well, Archbishop Tutu, when he was serving a congregation, told his people one Sunday that their primary identity, regardless of what anyone called them, was child of God. He drove that point home, and when they walked out of church, every back was a little straighter, every head held a little higher, because he had not called them poor or disenfranchised. He had called them blessed. We who endeavor to follow Jesus would do well to remember this as we shape our lives around service to others. We are called to transform this world into a more level place, but we can only do that when we learn to see people not as projects, but as partners. It's easy to slip into the pattern of seeing people in terms of their needs, but Jesus shows us to see people in terms of their potential. This does not mean to ignore the realities that shape people's lives. Those are real and important, but those are circumstances, not traits. Poverty, homelessness, hunger. Those are things people experience, not things that people are. We need to learn to see the value in people before honing in on their problems. This reframing of how we see people is transferable to how we see entire communities of people. For instance, this little town where I am, or let me call it what it is, it's a census-designated area in Shasta County. We're not even a town. People here, we know all too well the challenges facing this community, and we could start naming them right now and be pretty depressing. Or we could start by listing the assets, and that's way more productive, especially if someone wants to have a deeper conversation about how to implement positive change in the community. Thinking about what we do have makes it seem like investing in this place is not only possible but worth it. But if one starts by saying, this place is a ghost town with no future, well, who would want to waste time dreaming of how to make life here any better if there is no hope? And it's the same for this little church in which I find myself sitting today. I know that we are a small congregation, and we could use that as an excuse to doubt our own worth. We could list all the things we don't have, or we could notice what we do have, our great love for one another and our desire to be of service to our community. And thanks to the fact that many of my congregation is retired, pretty open schedules, that's a gift. It's easy to lament sometimes, oh, we don't have a ton of younger families, thinking that would bring energy in the form of strong young volunteers, but the reality is most young parents are so busy raising their children and hauling them every which way to sports and activities that they hardly have time to come to church, much less to participate in ministry. So that's the gift that an older congregation has, time and wisdom and experiences we're sharing. So, what do we do with this new way of thinking? Do we consider what we have and recognize that there is so much more that we could do when we pay attention to our assets, not our deficits? Right here in this place, we have everything we need. Adoptable grandparents, space. What a difference it makes to start by naming our assets. This way of thinking, this asset framing, it's made a difference in my life. When I was a kid, honestly, I didn't think that much of myself as a student. I showed up to school and I was well behaved. But I didn't think I was anything special. Not at all. Not until my 6th grade teacher wrote this thing on my report card. He wrote, "Allison is very smart, and I wish she would speak up more in class." I was blown away. I was smart? A teacher wanted me to talk? I thought we were supposed to shut up and listen. Now, he could have said it this way: "Allison's shyness prevents her from participating in class." That would have just confirmed what I had been told all my life. I was shy and it was a problem. That was a story I'd heard many times. Grown-ups would call me shy, sometimes sharing a laugh about it while I stood there humiliated because it was clear that they found my shyness ridiculous. That I didn't feel comfortable talking to them was disappointing, I could tell. Shy. It was my personal label, and that was fine, as it gave me permission to sit quietly and go unnoticed. But this teacher named Mr. Waite, he turned it all upside down. If I was smart, as he said. Well, I began doing very well in school, making straight A's, which meant teachers called on me for the answers they knew I had. And yes, I was shy, and my face would turn beet red every time I spoke, but I began to grow in confidence, just knowing that one good thing about myself: I was smart. My shyness didn't go away, but it was no longer something to hide behind. How do you see yourself? Has anyone ever told you that you are amazing? Well, you are, because the same Spirit that moved in Jesus Christ is the same Spirit that lives and breathes in you. And that's a big deal. You are so beloved to your Creator, who made you to be exactly who you are. I am sure you've got flaws, but you've also got incredible potential, and I hope you can see that in yourself. As followers of Jesus, I hope that we can see it, whether we are looking in the mirror or out the window. I hope we can hear Jesus' voice echoing across that level plain as he surveyed a group of hopeful but hurting people and called them blessed. May you also feel blessed.